I had a good life as a child. We'd get up in the morning and kind of didn't want to take time to eat and went to the river, just even to go outside and smell the river. I had a really good, happy childhood. You know, you don't really believe your life is going to change.
My mother and father were very musical, and he played the guitar and my mother played the piano. And we used to sit out on the front veranda, and he would strum on the guitar and we'd all be singing. And it was like putting on a little concert for the neighborhood. But it's something that we really enjoyed doing, and it was a nice pastime, and that brought us close together.
My mother made baskets, all kinds of baskets, laundry baskets, which were normally at least 3 feet high. And my brother and I, this is the middle brother, we used to play hide and seek all the time, and so I hid in the basket because I was the younger child, and he just couldn't find me. And I remembered my mother telling me to be quiet, and because I was in there a long time because he couldn't find me and I wanted to get out.
People here got dressed up in their Indian regalia, and they'd start off marching as the Put-in-Bay was landing, or whatever the passenger ship. There were different ones. They'd start off and march about a block from my house along River Road, go by my house, into the fairgrounds, into the bandstand. And then all of us, including the passengers, would go in behind them.
Before I ever started school, I used to help my mother do beading, and we would go into town. Mind you, we walked from the reserve all the way uptown because there was no bus service at the time. They had these big, huge homes along Christina Street, and I used to think, well, those people just came here to this country. How can they afford to live in such big, huge houses as compared to the little shacks that we lived in? I used to be quite amazed at the difference between their lifestyle and ours. And so I used to think, well, to me it seemed like it took money, and to get money you had to work. So I decided what I really wanted to become was a nurse. But things didn't turn out that way.
I was 4.5 when I was taken from my front yard to be put into the residential school system. My brother, that was 2 years older, he had more memories of those days than I did. He was 6, a little over 6 when they took him. They took us on the same day, but we arrived at the school a day apart. And if you had been a brother and sister, at that time they would have separated you as you walked in the front door.
The Indian agent came and collected us all and put us on the train, and he warned us that we cannot get off until we get to Brantford. He said, the conductor will be watching you, so you're to stay in your seats until you get to Brantford, which we did. And then that began my experience with Mohawk Institute.
My dad got a job down the lake at the Canada Club and on Bassett Island, which means in the winter you couldn't get up here. The river froze. It froze so hard some cars could drive along the shore on the river. I could not get up here to school, so it was out of my parents' hands. The Indian Act said that all Indian children must go to school or their parents could be jailed. We were Crown wards until 1961. So we had no choice. Us older kids had to go to school, and on November 9th, 1943, I was 9 years old. We were told we were going to Mohawk Institute. That day, and we got on the train, I see myself in my mind's eye crying and inconsolable, and because it was just us 4 kids going, and my older sister was trying to comfort me and my brother. The principal met us at the train and took us to the school, and the principal separated us from my brother. He said when we came there, we would be able to have a visiting day, I think, once a month. In my 3.5 years there, I think that might have happened once. They didn't even want you making eye contact. When we're sitting in the, we had prayer service every evening, we'd be in the same room. No, you couldn't go over and say, "Hi, Dave." No way. You could not. I mean, you'd get a strapping. And when you witness a few strappings, you just don't want that to happen to you.
The very moment I saw the principal, who is also the minister there, I had an immediate reaction, sort of instinct. I knew that I couldn't trust him, and I didn't know why. I just had this feeling. I was forever being sent up to his office and being strapped, and they were severe straps. He would hit down as hard as he could. He would even get up on his tiptoes to have as much strength and as much leverage to come down as hard as he could. I didn't start any trouble of any kind, so I thought maybe he just wants to break my spirit.
They really like to make your arm and hands, they wouldn't, I think what was allowed was, a few straps on your hand. I don't know how many, whether it's 5 or 10, but some of them would, hit you on your here. And those kids would have, swelled up limbs.
We had a cubby hole under the stairs, and there was a cubby hole on both the boys' side and the girls' side, and it was isolation punishment. You were put in the cubby hole if they felt you did something severe, and speaking your own language was one of those things. And it was a cubby hole about 4 feet square, I would say, and dark, no light in there, and you were given bread and water.
I remember looking out the window. You could go to a bed and look out an open window. And I looked down there and I could see these boys down there. And then it looked like little piles of dust. And I thought, what the heck? Then I realized what was happening. These little boys are fighting. And the big boys are pushing them if they didn't want to fight, forcing them to fight. And even as a kid, I was appalled.
It was a very depressing atmosphere to be in, because you never knew when you were going to be attacked or by whom. So I found it very, very depressing.
Oh, I forgot to tell you one thing when you get there. You're assigned a number.
Do you remember yours?
Yeah, 21. My sister was 20.
You didn't have a name anymore. You had a number. So you felt like you were a prisoner.
All of this is so, I don't realize it before, so horrible. It brings back those old feelings. And to me, the hard part was having to witness today, I would say, the abuse of other kids.
I remember one time one of the girls had run away, but she had been brought back, and she was shamed in the dining room in front of all the kids about her behavior, and she was whipped in front of all the kids. And whenever you see anybody being attacked like that, it's like you're being punished as well. So it was very, very dismal. It wasn't a happy place at all. None of the kids seemed to be happy, and no wonder,
I learned that you had to have survivor skills just to live every day. And so that's what we developed throughout those years. There's 123 children buried in the cemetery behind my school, my brother being one of them. There were a lot of children that died for different reasons. He died of medical neglect. As I was learning the ins and outs of this residential school system and why we are the way we are, I realized the dreadful impact that the breaking up of the families was to our community and to the 600 other First Nations across Canada. And so I realized that I never knew my brother. I remember being at his funeral, and I was about a little over 5 at that point, and I wondered who that was in the box. And I realized why my mother was the way she was, because she went to residential school. So it isn't so much of the fact that I mourned his death because I didn't know him. He was really nobody to me except a body in a box.
No one ever told us if a child had gone. They were there one day and then they were gone the next. You never really knew what happened to them. Nobody ever said anything to us. We were never informed.
You worked half a day and you went to school half a day.
The boys, they worked the farm, and the girls, they did all the washing, mending, and scrubbing and whatever, and cooking. So we were the ones that took care of the building. One of my jobs, my first jobs, was washing dishes. If you can imagine washing dishes for around 200 kids, that's a lot. It takes a lot of time. And then I also worked in the dining room for the staff. And their food was it was so tantalizing. It was torture, really, to work there, because the food they got was so different from what we had. And they had their own chef prepare their food. So there was a huge difference.
We're half starved there. We haven't even talked about the diet there. But let's just say everybody was half starved there. The food was no good.
In those days, this was 1941 to 1953, they had to get permission from Ottawa to go to the doctor, to take a child to the doctor. If they pulled your teeth, they would wait till they were bad enough. They would lay you on the kitchen table and pull them out with a pair of pliers. I think the goal I know the goal in those days was to kill the Indian in the child, get rid of the Indian problem. They didn't out and out have a plan to exterminate each one individually, but if it happened, there was never any sorrow about it. We were called names that I know what they thought of us. And so, like, you dumb Indian, you stupid Indian, you're not good for anything. And when you look at the goals in the old records of Shingwak anyway, it says, oh, we're trying to make them into farmers and housekeepers, and they'll be good to do that. So we know what they thought of us at the time. They could have given us a lot better care. I think the emotional abuse is far worse than the physical abuse even that the children endured during that time.
We came out in June, and by now, remember, my kid brother's with us. He wouldn't eat. We wondered what's wrong. At least you'd have candy or something if you don't want to eat food, and because was about a 4-hour trip. He wouldn't eat. We got home. Here his mouth was sore, bleeding. My mom took him to the doctor. He had trench mouth.
When you come home, like you're such an uptight person because of all the restrictions that you had at the school, and you're also full of anger. I knew it wasn't my mother's fault, but yet I took it out on her. I was so angry, and it spoiled our relationship. I never had a closeness with her after that, and it's as if I were blaming her for the situation we were in, but yet I knew in my head it wasn't true. But it was just a total family breakdown. Anyway, she had to board me out to another home, and she laughed because the situation was really bad at home. I couldn't stand a lot of things, and it's all that anger that I felt at the school. I was taking it out on her.
When I look at all the impacts that we endured over those things that happened to us at the schools, it made a connection for me on why we are the way that we are. And people have asked us, well, how much money do you want? What can we do to fix this? And I say that 4 generations of people from our community went to residential schools, so you aren't going to fix it overnight. You could say 4 generations it will take to cure up some of the problems, but I'm not even sure of that.
Learning about my culture will always be ongoing because it's all new to me.
Going to school, I had never heard of residential school, ever. It wasn't until probably my teenage years. So about 16, 17 is when I kind of knew more about residential school, and then kind of left it at that. That I didn't really know, but it was something. It wasn't until I started here at the Woodland Cultural Center. I was 28 when I started, and I really actually understood what a residential school was. And then the questions kind of started coming and asking my dad, where did he go? You know, how far back did this extend? And then finding out my grandma and my grandpa, both his parents, went to residential school. And my great-grandfather, he attended the Mohawk Institute as well on my mother's side. So on both sides of my family, they all went. And then I saw, as I learned more about residential school, how its implications have entered into our family dynamic, and more importantly, as well, our community at large. And then everything just kind of started to fall into place. I started to understand why our communities were in such, crisis kind of as they are. Understood kind of my own life, my own history.
It's hard to understand your culture when you're not raised with it, and when you come into it later in life, it's like learning something altogether all new again.
You feel a huge loss, and I feel that every day. I think how much has been taken and how much we'll never hear. And I don't think people, the general public, understand how much has been lost.
The residential school took away my natural mother. My parents are gone, I don't know who they are. I mean, I knew who they were, but I don't know who they are. I don't know what they went through. I don't know their culture. So for me, I live on the reserve, well, just off the reserve now, but living on the reserve was hard to identify with that culture.
I didn't find out till it was an adult. Till it was
Yeah.
like maybe 30
Yeah.
years, about 20 something years ago we found out. Nobody said anything to us.
It really didn't come to light in any expressed ways to us as children, except for hearing these surrounding conversations about the mush hole. That was back in the mush hole kind of thing. But they didn't talk about not eating, working, getting beat, the various forms of suffering that they were put through. That was never spoken to us.
These survivors weren't in households. They were in institutions. So then they become parents and they have no knowledge or no example to base anything on. And then they pass that on to their children, and they pass that on to their children. So with that comes multiple impacts. And we as a community, as families, we need to start looking at those impacts.
To hear my dad speak of being taken is really hard. Sorry. My dad talked about the story of how he was taken to residential school. I just think of my boy. I can't help but think of my boy when I think of my dad. He was taken to residential school when he was 7 years old. He was playing ice hockey with his friends, and a car pulled up and asked, "Where's Tom Rubin?" And of course all the boys didn't want to get taken, so they pointed to my dad and they picked him up and put him in the back seat with his brothers and sisters. And when they took him to the residential school, he went to Bishop's Horton Hall. And when they took him, he still had the skates on his feet. So they walked him in just like that. And that, that's the beginning of that separation of everything. So my dad was there for 5 years. And after 5 years, he didn't speak his language anymore. And it's hard because that's half of who I am, and I don't have that. I didn't have to go to a residential school to have the effects of it. I live with them every single day. I'm half Cree and I'm half Mohawk, and I only speak English. It's really hard. Because I think there's so much to be found in our languages, and so much of that is gone.
My mother was unable to raise my brother and I, and Geraldine, my mom now, adopted us and took us in and treated us like her own. We were raised no differently, but I know when I was growing up, I always thought I was different than everybody, because skin color was one thing that really made a difference, and I thought I couldn't identify with anyone else who was Native. I didn't know. I always considered I was part of this family, and Native culture was not in our home. Powwows we went to, but again, we couldn't identify with that. I couldn't personally identify with that culture, and I still have a hard time today identifying with it. You can say, you're a status Indian. Well, who is a status Indian? What does that exactly mean?
You feel like an outsider in your own land. It's a very crazy feeling to have. Kids didn't know what my identity was. I think that was really hard too. Being asked, are you Asian? Are you Spanish? Are you every other thing that I wasn't? But again, for that lack of education, knowing that Indigenous people are here, that we're still here.
To me, for one, to give up your child, forcibly to give up your child, and then two, not have the means or be able to see them for years. I couldn't imagine that. And then the abuse that took place at these schools and some of the stories that I heard, it's just, I couldn't believe it. It made me sad and it made me mad all at the same time.
Knowing that what happened in the residential schools and seeing the elders, the ones that had actually been through the residential school system, seeing how they raised their family, when you actually know what happened, you understand why they did what they did, you know, whether it was the drinking or the abuse, you know, you understand that after you know the facts.
We have a youth epidemic of suicide. We have missing and murdered Indigenous women. You know, drugs and alcohol, you know, run pretty rampant on the reserves. All these factors contribute to a much larger issue. The issue of colonization, the issue of the most recent residential school system, and how it all affects us today. And yeah, I do feel that pain. I feel it every day.
The discipline in our house when we were very young was very strict. I remember it always being strict. My father was very stern. When I was young, I remember my dad being the physical discipline we received. I received it. I witnessed it among our siblings. It was harsh.
My dad was very much the disciplinarian, but I think some of that was residential schools and some of that was his military career.
We were scared to death of the paddle. And back in those days, you were allowed to paddle a child on the butt, and Dad's beatings were different than my mom's paddles on the butt. I remember getting spanked when I did something wrong. I remember my brother, I think he was about 17 or 18, the last time he got paddled. And I forget what he'd done wrong, but I remember my mom saying, "Bend over." He bent over. She wailed 3 wallops on his butt, and he turned around and looked at her and said, "You know, Ma, that didn't hurt." And she said, "Sure made me feel good."
Yeah, my dad was a military man. He did a tour in Korea, 2 tours in Vietnam. He was in 2 plane crashes, 2 helicopter crashes in Vietnam. He was a prisoner of war. I don't remember much with my dad, doing things with my dad as a child, but I remember that he committed a crime. He was sent to prison, and I remember visiting him in prison. And even though he did something wrong, I still looked up to my dad as being my dad. I still loved him. I still respected him.
I mean, I know my father loved us all and loved us all very well, but, you know, he wouldn't express the term "I love you" openly or, you know, to any of us.
I think the most apparent effect of residential school for me was that my dad never really was completely open to hugs and that affection. Doesn't mean that he didn't love me. I know my dad loves me. He shows it in so many different ways. But just to hug or to actually say those words, "I love you," was always very difficult for him. And it was difficult for me to try to understand that growing up. So I think I looked for that in other ways, getting older, getting into other things. But again, I didn't want to transfer that to my son. So the first, couple weeks that I was at the Woodland Cultural Center, doing tours, just kind of starting, I cried every single day. I would go home and just hug my son, and he would just be squirming, trying to get away from me. But I was like, no, I'm gonna hug you. You're gonna hear "I love you" a million times a day. And he is the sweetest boy and most lovable kid, and able to say, "I love you, Papa. I love you, Nana. I love you, Mom."
I miss him. I walked in the house today and his chair's empty. But he's a good man, and all the stuff that he's been through, he still was a loving man. He didn't have hate in him, he was still a loving man.
Bothers you, like what they went through, and she didn't want us to feel that in our lives, and she's protected us that way a bit.
Right, yeah.
And that, so a lot of admiration for her.
I see my dad with my boy, and it's like he's learning how to play. Even though he's in his 60s, he's learning how to love again. And he sees the importance of those things. I think I got a lot of my positivity and hope from my dad, because he said, don't live in the past. Like, don't live with what happened to me. Take that and make it better for Liam, my son. Make it better for, future generations. And that's, I think, our focus. That's what I think our focus continues to be, is what do we want for our kids?
My name is Red Dog. This is a poem that I wrote, inspired by the movie Aftershock. I did not attend residential school myself, although many of my ancestors, family members have, and at this time in my life I can still feel the after effects of sexual abuse that caused me shame, confusion, depression, anger, revenge. The aftershock also affected me mentally, spiritually, creating an angry bitterness, evolving into a great monster of self-destruction. Through the abuse of alcohol and drugs, I have learned to numb the pain, emotionally suppressing my inner demons. The aftershock led me to jail, incarcerated, crimes committed as a young felon. I grew up searching for my cultural identity and who I was as a First Nation. I did not know my language. I did not know my ceremonies of my people. I did not have an Indian name. Knowing I wanted to be a winner and not a loser, I had to be brave, to believe in myself. The aftershock still resonates with post-traumatic stress. I suffer from it, but I do not have to suffer alone. There is a power greater than myself, in whom I call the Great Spirit, the God of my choice. The free will to choose has helped me let go of my burden. And the aftershock of suicide tendencies bothers me no more. As a child, all I ever wanted was love, and to be loved, and to give love. And today, I stand before you because I am that love. I am a light that shines. I am the light in the dark when there appears to be no hope. There is a sacred fire that burns within my soul. I feed it good thoughts, positive vibes, for the Ojibwe tribe in me is strong and proud. It was love that saved me from the aftershock, a rippling effect, generational trauma. I am a survivor, not a victim. And for that, I am a warrior. And there is a word in the Ojibwe language. It is called Ogichida. Translation, strong heart. And I had to have a strong heart to be brave, to face my emotional burdens and those scarred memories in my mind. And having that warrior spirit helped me become a warrior. Because at times, I felt so weak, like a little twig on a tree, just ready to snap and break, ready to give up and die. And it's because of that warrior I am alive today. Standing strong and continuing to be brave, not only for myself, but for those who cannot be brave. Because there's a lot of unbrave people out there who take their own lives, and they choose to deal with this aftershock by suppressing those abused memories with drugs and alcohol and violence, and using those excuses from whatever their parents passed down or handed down to them, and using those excuses to live a bad life and to feed that spirit of negative energy and allowing it to control and direct your life in a bad direction. And I'm very honored and I'm very grateful to be alive today through that Ogichida spirit.